Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. How is everyone today? Yeah, Alhamdulillah. All right. First and foremost, thank you very much for being here. We are very appreciative of your presence for our conversation today, books and ideas. So with us, we have the book Countering the Western Canon, Other Ways of Knowing About Journalism and Media, with our speaker, Dato Dr. AHMAD Murad MERICAN, who is a professor of social and intellectual history, the National Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, Istac-Iium. He's also a senior fellow at the Center for Southeast Asia Research and Hub Search, De La Salle University, Manila, the Philippines, and he has written extensively for various platforms and media, including the New Straits Times, Melaka Hari Ini, and the National Opinion Journal, Dewan Masyarakat. And with him, we also have our brother, Mr. SHAZANI MASRI, who is a PhD candidate here at Istac-Iium and is also a lecturer at the Department of Politics and Government, Faculty of Social Science and Humanities, UNIMAS. So please join me in giving them a round of applause. All right. So I'll be the moderator for today. My name is ARIEF, and I'd like to share a few thoughts on the book, first and foremost, I'd say. Professor Murad's compelling collection of essays deals with a problem that is real but is often overlooked. This problem, as it were, permeates our consciousness in that it deals with how our reality is construed, packaged, and then disseminated in the form of news. News or news reporting is not the issue in and of itself, but the broader concern here is how we have taken for granted the journalistic frameworks of today, without necessarily scrutinizing its epistemic underpinnings and inherent biases. Professor Murad calls for a reimagination of journalism, which moves away from the clutches of European or Eurocentric framing of the global north. And he also mentioned that man is homo narrans, as understood as the narrator of events, of the world around him. However, in the modern milieu, we observe that this narration has been commodified, which often closes an eye on structural framings of sensationalist events which grab our attention and leaves little room for original thought. Professor MERICAN mentions with great clarity that the arguments against modern journalism is that it assumes the notion of objectivity, which paradoxically engenders its own biases built in the procedures themselves. And this is in the chapter Culture, Journalism as Discourse Among Civilizations, Concept and Dialogue. So the book, Countering the Western Canon, Other Ways of Knowing About Journalism and Media, was published in the year 2023, which is last year, by the Penerbit University Pendidikan Sultan Idris, UPSI. And this session is actually the first after 5 years. After 5 years. So the last book and idea session, as it were, was 5 years ago, prior to COVID. So Alhamdulillah, we would like to reinvigorate or have this session even more, inshallah. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Professor AHMAD Murad MERICAN. Bismillah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, I would like to thank all of you, friends, colleagues, students from near and far, who have taken the time and opportunity to attend this session. This session is a resurrection, of the book discussions and book review session that Istac have had until 2019, until COVID. Over the 1 or 2 year period between 2018 and 2019, Istac has been very active physically in inviting writers, authors from inside and outside the university to discuss and to learn ideas on the authorship of their work, the circumstances, the rigor involved, the strategies and reasons, how the book came out. I mean, these are the things that we don't read in the book. Very rare that we find an elaborate insight, articulation of the strategies of the author. It's innate, it is subdued in the text. So this session is, as what Arief said, is a resurrection of what stopped in 2019. And it is called Books and Ideas Forum. I've labeled it as such, as a platform for anyone, including yourselves, if you have books, so that we can explore, we can internalize the thinking, the sentiment behind the author, the anatomy of the book, what the work of the text represent. Before that, also I have to thank SHAZANI, postgraduate student and friend of mine, and Arief. Also, we have grown to meet many times over. In their willingness to talk about the book. I have my skepticism in that nobody reads my book. And I think SHAZANI is the only one up to now, and Arief, who have read my book in Malaysia. This was published in 2023. And what I'll do today is to share with you some of the problems and arrangement of the theme and the thinking behind the book, and walk through the route that I've taken over the last 38 years as an academic. I didn't know that I would come to this level of 38 years in the academic line. I thought that I would go off at 20 or 25 years. Over 4 universities. Right. The book that the subject that we're talking about is this book. Title is Countering the Western Canon. Other ways of knowing about journalism and media. I've always had a fascination for ideas, and I'm known as a lecturer in journalism. Fortunately or unfortunately, I was housed in the journalism school in 1986. But my approach to journalism is slightly different from the discourse that is predominantly in Malaysia. Although I have taught, and those are, I think, 2 of my students, former students. Although I have taught writing courses, and when people think of journalism, they would think of news. They'll think that, yeah, journalism is news. Yeah, what is it's news? It's just writing of news, and we consume news. That's all. It's short pieces of capsules, and it pervades in now in the social media, and that's it about journalism. There's nothing else to talk about. It is skills. It is what people do is practice. And this is the predominant thinking of journalism in Malaysia, even among residing in the journalism schools, residing among academics in journalism. They are living in error. They are not doing justice to the corpus, and the epistemology. Okay? To many, journalism is just like a chore or an activity like washing dishes, ironing clothes, and that's it. There's no knowledge behind it. There's no literature behind it. What I'm trying to do here in Malaysia is to, over the last, almost 40 years, is to bring this up to the public and teach the journalism schools and journalism professors that, hey, there's something to journalism that we need to know. It's more than just writing news. So over the years, I have tried to develop this, and perhaps I'm the only one in Malaysia. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know. You check and see. I don't know whether there are journalism people in here or not.
I think you're the only one, bro. Yeah.
I was the NST from 96 to 2001.
Yeah.
Yeah, doing that.
You must have seen my writings.
Yeah.
But I invited, actually, I invited a few people from the journalism school in the Klang Valley, also in Sarawak. I know they couldn't make it, they can see online and USM, but I think only two are here. The rest are not interested. So the thing is that in Malaysia, I mean, the study of journalism and communication in Malaysia has been around for 54 years this year. 54 years. It began in 1971 in USM and ITM. But nothing much has changed. It began as, one way to put it is it began to establish a bastion against communism at that time when war was looming in Vietnam and the Khmer Rouge was in Kampuchea. So they were talking about the domino theory. It was a Cold War, one of the height of the Cold War. So Southeast Asia was ripe for domination. And one way in which the workings of the CIA was to influence the domestic population. And this is normal, covert operations, covert diplomacy, which have been around since 1946 or even earlier. And external funding is nothing new, nothing to shout about. I mean, they've always been happening. So it was part of the covert policy and strategy of imperialist America, use the term imperialist America, to guard against the communist Russia. And what happened was that they wriggled themselves and established communication schools so that they can maintain expression and democracy, perpetuate democracy in Southeast Asia. And this happened in 1971. Although in Indonesia, you have earlier in the 50s, but we're talking about in the context of the Cold War scenario. So communist schools are instrumental as part of the democratizing process, as part of resisting the reds or the communists. And that's one of the reasons why we have training and education in journalism in Malaysia. So it grew. And much of the discourse over the last 50 years in Malaysia, even in Singapore and in other South-Asian countries, have focused on journalism as a skill, journalism as writing, editing, the normal forms of media. There are, even in India, the teaching of journalism is very much influenced by, the mainstream American, but in America, in parts of Europe, there are other approaches. And here we're talking about sociological and historical approaches. Now, one of the things that has happened is that in 1986, I'll go through, as you can see my Microsoft Word. That is my first book in 2001. Title is The Journalist as Storyteller, Essays on the Scribe and His Times. This book is a result of my putting together various papers which I've written way back in 1986 while I was a student. And when I came back, I had a manuscript in 1987. I finished my manuscript. And I peddled the manuscript to 5 publishers, including known and not so known publisher. All publishers rejected my manuscript. Some did not even read it because they told me that this is about journalism. So we have got, there are other works that were written on journalism in Malaysia. All these works are on how to report. How to report, how to edit. So You Want to Be a Journalist, a very famous book published in 1971. And then you have a few other books on reporting and developing skills. I said, this is not about developing skills. This is about the sociology of journalism. In the in 87 or 88, I was trying to introduce the corpus of looking at journalism from a sociological perspective and from a historical perspective. There was none. Okay? And there's still no book in Malaysia except for that book and this book and various others written by me that puts journalism in the context of history and in the context of sociology. There is one or two books that talks about the history of journalism, yes, by AHMAD, Sejarah Bibliografi Kewartawanan di Alam Melayu, and PROF has in several parts of his book, Origins of Malay Nationalism, and his biography talk about the history, the empirical perspective of journalism. Who can him a little bit when he wrote about journalism as sources of history. But when we talk about a discursive kind of approach, that was in my manuscript. It was rejected. Finally, it was published in 2001 by a friend. It was used by several universities. Now it's out of print. And we look at the cover. This is originally is a photo from Reuters in black and white. And this photo is the Reuters, you see the Reuters journalists covering the Abyssinian War in 1932. I got permission from Reuters actually, and I told the publisher just to render a watercolor pen and use it as a cover. So that's what happened. So this is again, the impression of any book is important. To me, you judge a book by the cover also. Yeah? And I've seen, some people say, covers issues. No, beautiful covers also provides beautiful books. I mean, I've viral over the last few months, this one site with beautiful covers and mainly about Ottoman history and European history by Braille, I.B. Torres, Oxford, Cambridge. These are just, I mean, the cover evokes the sentiment of the book. I mean, the genuineness about the book, how it's crafted. And I find that among European publishers, they would go and get actual visuals from archives, from libraries, and get copyrights and publish it as a book cover. They don't just use AI and all these things, and it's artificial. Anyway, so that's the book on the journalist and storyteller. Just to give you a background of how this book came about. Yeah? And then the second book, I have 24 books. I published 24 books over the last 38 years. Professor is more, 50. These are some of my books relating to media and journalism. Yeah? So the second one is titled Media History, Worldviews and Communication Futures, published in 2005 by Penerbit Universiti Malaya. This book is half of my thesis. Yeah. I cannot publish the whole of my thesis because part of it needs revision. I was talking about the Frankfurt School, critical theory, and I know that I ended writing my thesis in 2000, but after that there are quite a number of other discourses on critical theory, so I left it at that. And moreover, I lost my thumb drive, was stolen from my car. They broke the window and they stole my laptop, and that's it. How my brain of my thesis is gone. But hard copy is around. But nevertheless, this is half of the thesis. The idea here is to provide a view of media and communication from a civilizational perspective. This was, I finished the thesis in 2000, and this was published in 2005. I took a 6 month sabbatical to put things together. It's not just having thesis and come out the book, because you need time to put things together and to curate the manuscript. So again, I'm trying to conjure, you know, a thought about, yeah, when you talk about communication, you have to think about civilization. There are intersections between communication, civilization, and media. So this book provides that perspective, and there are 5 chapters. One of the chapters is on McLuhan and Harold Innis. Any one of you remember or know Harold Innis is an economic historian, Canadian. He talked about media biases, actually. He's an economic historian, but he talked about media biases. He talked about the fluid media and the static media. He gave examples of the pyramid as a media, because the pyramid is a structure that stores information. So when I was in Alhambra recently, I thought that, oh, this was not mentioned by Harold Innis. Alhambra is actually an example par excellence of a building that was created by information. That stores knowledge, that stores wisdom, and the structure communicates and transmits. You know, because to me, when you talk about architecture is a structure that transmits knowledge. It transmits symbolism. And for example, this building. So again, I included that discussion of looking at the built environment as medium, and McLuhan's axiom as medium as the message. So when you talk about, for example, the present presence of the social media, right? It's not so much of the content that's here, but it is this thing itself. It's a physical thing. That's the message, not what you open and look at the arguments and the discourses in the social media. But this is the message. This itself is the message. So at the time, the argument by McLuhan was that television, when it appeared in the 60s, it itself is the message, not the programs on television. So
The box itself.
the box itself, the technology itself is the message. So Innis was the guru of McLuhan. And I was extending Innis's argument there. And the other chapter, I wanted to include the marginalized thinking to be part of communication. 3 thinkers were included. Al-Farabi, thanks to Prof. SUBHAN, who introduced in the book, Ibn Khaldun, and Toshihiko Izutsu. Izutsu's book on the Quranic Watan Shong and communication between Lord Jibreel and Muhammad. And Ibn Khaldun's articulation on transmission of knowledge and information and criticality of thought. Al-Farabi's view of language and linguistics. So the classical linguistics should be part and should be studied as part of the corpus of communication. So this is the book. And the cover, again, is deliberately designed. I took this from an image. If you remember, there was this magazine, Afkar Inquiry, in the 70s and 80s. They provide, it's a beautiful magazine, monthly, beautiful cover. And this a cover, I acknowledge, and I actually, it's not the whole thing, but I cropped the photo. It's an example of how knowledge is transmitted in this particular scene in Baghdad. Because in Baghdad, you have whole culture of media and communication, which is underappreciated. You have the Warak, you have the Warakin, you have the circulation of ideas, you have the copyist. I mean, that's a part of transmission of ideas, and you have the ijazah and so on. So again, we're talking about, when we talk media, we're not talking about what we know as newspaper or television. We're talking about the whole gamut, the whole apparatus. What Gramsci said, the cultural and information producing apparatus. But yeah, we can go beyond Gramsci. The building itself is a cultural and information producing apparatus. So that's this is 2005, and in 2008 I came out with this book. In fact, when I was doing my thesis, issues on the dynamics of the communication journalism school surface. Some schools in the US closed down, actually, in Texas and various other places. And there were changes in the approach, and both in America and Europe. And I was seeing the difference between the schools of thought in Canada, in the US. Again, New York will be different from California, and also in Europe. British mazhab is different from the Western European school of thought, different from the French, Italian, and Eastern European, and Slavic. You know, the Slavic view of communication is totally, you know, the opposite, the dialogic of it as compared to the US. So I wanted to extend that in my thesis, but of course I got to stop somewhere. And I thought that, yeah, my thesis would include that because I got to stop. So I would extend it after my thesis. So this is the result of my post-thesis venture when I convened. Well, the idea was to convene scholars from Malaysia and other parts of the world from across the discipline on those who study media and communication. So I invited a few from UIA at the time. This was in 2000 and I published 2008, but this was in 2004. From mathematics, from biology, from economics, from architecture. Because when you talk about the field, some people call discipline, but I would prefer to call it a field. The field of communication is fluid, it's fuzzy, it is amorphous, it is a contribution from many disciplines. In fact, those who study the media, the root paradigm for 60, 70 years was the mathematical theory of information. Shannon and Weaver, you remember? Yeah? And this was the root paradigm. Source is very Aristotelian, linear, source, message, receiver, and you have signal and noise. So this was Shannon and Weaver. Those taking engineering and allied fields would know. And this was borrowed by other disciplines as well, borrowed in biology, borrowed in economics, borrowed in Laswell's political science, in Daniel Lerner's, it influenced theory of modernization, it influenced, of course, communication in media. And Shannon, I read the biography before he died, well, not long before he died, he said, had I known that my theory was used, I would have asked for royalty. Because that was the root. You study biology. I mean, you know, because biology is also one of the, well, biology used that, and biology benefited from it. And many also other disciplines derive from biology. One of which is organization theory. So, there was this contestation. One is the mathematical linear contestation. The other is the linguistic and philosophical and sociological approaches, especially in the Russian view of looking at it, and the French view. Very interesting. The French view of communication also involved the flow of blood in the body, and this is part of the text. So this came out. I put together a number of papers. And actually, at that time, it was too early to talk about the history of communication in Malaysia since 1971. But nevertheless, I still put there, Blinded by the Lights. You remember the song, Blinded by the Lights? You're not old enough?
Who song was that?
Bruce Springsteen. Bruce Springsteen's Blinded by the Light in the 80s. I had this resonance because Bruce Springsteen was in Minnesota. I was studying in Minnesota, Minneapolis. So I remember Blinded by the Light. And actually, some of these numbers were quite sociological in nature. Don McLean's, and I mean, he has a BA in philosophy. So Had it not been BA philosophy, he would have written about Starry Night. So I took this title from Bruce Springsteen and added S, blinded by the lights. Journalism Communist Study in Malaysia since 1971. I was critical. I was a bit cynical to the excitement with the media and communication. They think that yeah, it's easy to study. It's all happy. You know, I mean, there's no depth. My point is, I'm adverse to this. So I thought that. So again, the photo is also curated by me. I got the copyrights from the National Archives. This is a 1963 film cinema in KL. Audience. And I told the illustrator to paint the car red. But the photo is not in white. So this actual photo is meant to be that way. It's blinded by the lights. And this is 2008. And after that, I came up with this, in other words, Journalism, Science, Social Science and Society, 2017. This is I put together my column, my newspaper writings in the NST, mainly in the New Straits Times, making comments about essentially the history of journalism in Malaysia and comments about journalism, comments about the profession of journalism, some personal experience and encounters, and I didn't know that when this was published with the title "In Other Words," I thought that this is the only title in the world. But I discovered that there are many books titled "In Other Words." And if you read this, one of the earliest books I discovered was there's a book, a biography by Jhumpa Lahiri. Jhumpa Lahiri is an Indian author, American scholar, who wanted to transfer her language from English to Italian. And she lived Italian, she wrote Italian. And that's why she called her book "In Other Words." Also, I discovered this after I've published this. Anyway, this is to introduce journalism in context. I focus on journalism to introduce journalism in the context of society and social science, because people think that journalism is just, I guess, as I've said, words and writing. No, journalism is very much close to the social sciences. And the idea here is for all this while in Malaysia and in the Southeast Asia, in other parts of Asia, in America, journalism is placed in a communication school. This is my protest. This book is about my protest in taking out journalism from the communication school on its own. Why? Because if it's in the communication school as of now, it will be encumbered in terms of space and budget and focus. Because now people don't talk about journalism anymore, people talk about media. Nobody uses the vocabulary journalism over the last 20 years as a result of the internet in 1996 and the social media that we have now. People forget, and this is the problem. One of the problems that Malaysia is facing is due to that, because people talk about the effects of the media, people talk about the consumption of media, but people don't know that a portion of the media is operated by people who are called journalists, by the activity of journalism, by the ethos and value of journalism. It may not be correct and it may not be perfect, as we have seen, and what we see now in Gaza, what we see now, what we come to be a position where it's impossible to see because of this, what's happening in Gaza, is because of journalism too. It's impossible. Every day when you watch this, you see the social media, when you see CNN, ABC, or whatever on TV, you just cannot see what's happening there. That's the work of journalism. Yeah? Something has got to be addressed. You got to redress the ethos of journalism. You got to redress the conventions and institutions and the profession of journalism. How do you do that? I think we're doing that. We're talking about it next week in a conference. So again, the idea here is to place and locate and relocate journalism close to the social sciences, economics, politics, sociology, and close to philosophy. Because when you talk about an example, the encounter or the complicity between journalism and genocide, we're talking about philosophical issues of objectivity, rationality, reality, factuality, reason, rationality, which Western journalism takes pride in the objectivity. But what we see every day now is, well, I would say the collapse of Western journalism. So again, this book tries to, okay, this was before October 7, but this book tries to make sense of the context of the profession and the institution of journalism. And here you have, that's my photo taken by my daughter. Well, she was, so I thought I would take this and publish it as a cover of the book. Partly this is a fragment of my biography, some sort of an autobiography, yeah? A fragment. Anyway, that's 2017. And this is 2022. Okay, this is not a book. This is well, this is a book actually, the Handbook of Global Conventions in Communication Theory. It's a yearbook by the International Communication Station. This book is published by Routledge. I was approached by the editor because he was attracted to this book. He has read this book, and the editor is Japanese and the Korean. Somehow or other, this particular book of mine, Media History, has taken the interest of only three societies: the Japanese, the Koreans, and the Iranians. I'll be speaking to the Iranians soon. In fact, they wanted a copy. I will courier to them, and I think in 2006, I think a group of Iranian students in Malaysia approached me to translate a chapter from the book. I don't know whether they've done it or not, but I've not received anything. Anyway, so they were interested in that book. So, and also, and in that book, the writings of the chapter on Al-Farabi and Ibn Khaldun, they wanted for me to reproduce exactly what I produced in that book. I said, no, I cannot. I need to revise. So I revised within a certain perspective, retitled it as Al-Farabi and Ibn Khaldun as communication theorists, because in mainstream communication theory, you don't talk about Muslim thinkers. Essentially, mainstream communication theory would be European and American. Will be the positivists or the Marxists. Well, that's also mainstream. They become mainstream now. And New Science of Society before the European Enlightenment. That was the title. And here I'm promoting Al-Farabi Ibn Khaldun as communication theories before the emergence of European communication theories. So I suppose they have accepted it. And it's a good book, actually. It contains many chapters. And I think the Europeans, the Americans, the mainstream social science, as well as in community, they realize that the intellectual force from Asia is coming up. And so I think they wanted to appropriate it in this book. But of course, discourses about Asian perspectives on communication media has been around since the 70s and 80s. One of the culprits at the time was Majid Tehranian, the guy who wrote the Sukogokai. Majid Tehranian is very famous. I'm a fan of him. I mean, an intellectual fan. I read him since 1978 or late 70s. And he's written many books. And what he wrote preempted what is happening now. Okay? And some of the last works is the dialogue between Buddhism and Sufism. And I asked him, I met him a couple of times. I asked him whether he was Muslim. I just I don't like to ask the question. No, I said no, I'm a Sufi. Okay, so that's and lastly this particular book. Now before that, this was published 2023. Before that, I want to relate to you the major influences. Do I have time? Okay.
10 minutes.
Okay. Major influences that have influenced and that has contextualized this book in some ways. Okay? One is Edward Said, whom I've read in 1978. The book was at the time I was in ITM. In terms of the contestation of knowledge, the problems of knowledge production, and the perspectives. And much of my thinking and my writings, although I was in the journalism school, people don't see that. Okay? Even when I write about journalism, my first paper, in my first international paper in 1988, I had a portion of the Orientalist view of the world. I was writing about the coverage of Malaysia by The Economist. The other writer was talking about coverage of Malaysia by Time magazine. You find many interesting assertions, many interesting beliefs. Yeah? One of which is said that the first Prime Minister, Tunku Abdul Rahman, was a Mongol. He was a Mongol. So you can find this in The Economist in 1957. Again, I resonated the Saidian perspective on the world. So much of my work resonates there, and much of my papers also in my criticism on the idea of development and development journalism and modernization. This was 1978, and I read that too. And also Islam and Secularism, 1978 also. I also read the first book of Said Naqib, and Said Naqib's book, first, second chapters influenced me a lot. Much of this book is centered on the idea of the secular and secularism, and three things which was mentioned. One is the disenchantment of nature, which I'll pick up on that. Disenchantment of nature. Two, the deconsecration of values. And three, the desacralization of politics. Three things. And these are fused in arguments on media and journalism. For example, I was thinking of journalism, I called early on a cultural journalism. And culture, I resonated Syed Hussein Nas, Man and Nature, which I read in 1978 also. 78 was a very, very important year for me, the 78, 79. And also Islam and the Plight of Modern Man, the first book of Syed Hussein Nas that I read. Published 75, but I read it in the late 80s. Which resonates the idea of culture and cultivating. Okay? And one commentator of also, I think Nas was Klostermaier. Klostermaier, yeah. So he wrote about religion and culture. And when you talk about journalism, we in the modern sense, it's an artificial construct. It was created in the 17th century. But if we look at beyond that, journalism must be a more a natural construct in what whereby the language it uses should conform to our being. When I talk about our being here, I don't mean the modern language, because modernity, the language used in Islam is modern language. The modern paradigm cannot fit into the transcendent paradigm. The modern paradigm is based on timeliness, proximity, is based on time, the secular. How can a modern paradigm cover a timeless transcendent paradigm? There'll be definitely distortions. And this is the problem that we face, the world faced when suddenly the world was awoke with the Iranian Revolution, 1978, when the global media covered, and they cannot cover with the modern language, and if they do, and they distorted the theology, they distorted the spirituality, and so on. So this, the spirit and the sentiment of Syed Hussein Nas in this book, and Man and Nature, and Naqib Al-Atas, and Edward Said, forms the reservoir, I would say the reservoir of this book. So these are the assumptions and background. I've laid down the year, a little bit on the floor. Now, when people talk about writing a book, there are many ways of writing a book. Some would write a book, one sitting, well, they can finish a book. I know one professor who published a book in one sitting of maybe two weeks or 3 weeks. Okay? Well, he has published quite a number. Some professors, some scholars would take time. It's you know, we call it a labor. It's what called diligent labor.
Labor of love.
Labor of love. Yeah, there's another word for it. Not labor of love, but there's another one. And some, many, for example, would write in bits and pieces, publish here and there, or not publish, and put together. So what happened is that this book is ideas from this book had its genesis, as I've said, in those years, but empirically in 1985. In 1985, when I did a seminar paper in Minnesota, it became one of the chapters in this book. And a paper that was written and published would later be revised, published, and presented. Because why? Because there will be different audience, different contexts, and different circumstances. So this is how the book came about. Papers revised, presented, re-represented, and changed, and you know, they have their own journey. They have their own passage over time, and this one is over what 30 years. Yeah. Okay. Example. Okay. Okay. Let me go through. There are about 9 chapters, including one postscript. Chapter 8, for example. Chapter 8, Orientalism in the Reportage of Religion. Chapter 8 is a response toward the reportage of Islam. Yesterday we talked about Islamophobia, how the knowledge of Islam has been produced. This has gone through several phases. It was first presented as a paper in 2008 in a conference organized by this university on the representation of Islam. At the time, I was in another university, University Technology Petronas. After I presented this paper, and when this paper, the presentation of the paper was covered, and it was covered by several media, including the Israeli military, because I proposed in this paper that the teaching of Islam, the teaching of the coverage of Islam be taught in all universities. The teaching of Islamic civilization be the context in terms of the coverage of Islam, or in terms of the teaching of journalism too. When you teach journalism, we have to teach, if we want to produce people who are literate in the reportage about Islam, we have to teach Islamic civilization. And they were questioning me, who's going to teach Islamic civilization? These are BBC and the Israeli military. So this paper went through that. After that, I published it in the journal Asia Pacific Media Educator in 2012, I think, and it ended up as a paper. So again, you find the roots that the paper have taken over the years. So I think that's about it. The background and the root. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope I at least hear some criticisms from my colleagues here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Murad. Without further ado, we'd like to invite Brother Shazani as a discussant for this text, inshallah.
Right. Thank you, Brother Arif. Assalamualaikum and a very good evening, everyone. Professor Murad, members of academia, fellow friends. Okay, I think what I'm trying to do today is I'll read a general book review, what I've prepared and going to publish for Journal Borneo Kalimantan, which is my home journal in published, University Malaysia Sarawak. So the context of me reading this book is well, one is for my PhD thesis, because I'm doing part of my title is Politics and the Sacred. So he wrote exactly that, desacralization of politics. So that is one of the major content. And at the time I did not know any of the scholars that Malaysian scholars especially, that address directly the topic epistemologically. The one I'm referring to is the one who engaged directly in political science. My background is in, I did my economics and political science way back in 2010 as an undergrad in Illinois, United States, and then as a postgrad in political theory in London, where, at the time was when I tried to think, it was a bit turbulent time when the notion of muscular liberalism was pretty much the in thing over there, and in London especially, the period of shortly after Gordon Brown. And then I still remember when I did my master's, I don't have the language, so to speak, to engage in their giants of way of knowing, the way of knowing about politics especially. So when I first found Prof. Murad's book, Countering the Western Canon, it was like, mashallah, it's a huge title and it's a new one for me. Then there is a dimension of journalism and the media, which is I'm almost totally blind spotted. I have no background in journalism and the media, except maybe one class about media and campaigns. Professor Scott Altos taught me in University of Illinois. And then that is pretty much about when I think about the media as a discourse, is something about public opinions, major media such as the CNN and whatnot, and not about the sociology of the media that you have thought about. So I thought that is something new when I read the book. And then, this is a bit on, to me, the book is a proposition to rethink about journalism in the media. It challenges the current knowledge paradigm, especially in Malaysian syllabi and schools of journalism, communication, and media studies. And then away from Euro-American perspectives towards local knowledge based on tradition and perennial values. This is another surprising part of my reading of your book, because to my surprise that you are trying to relate on the discourse of the sacred of Syed Hussein Nasser Scientia Sacra. And also, there's also, I think you quote once, Preach of Shuang, Understanding Islam. And then I wonder, amidst the so-called secular discourse that is taken for granted, basically, in pretty much all of the social sciences, especially the present ones, there comes a voice that tries to present a glimpse of the sacred, if you will, and in a field as obscure to me, at least, as journalism. That is another dimension that surprised me when I read this book. And then you wrote something about the problem that the schools is there is a little to assess at present journalism, and then there is also ask the locals, okay, who have seemingly adopted the views to comprehend social political phenomena in our own community through their own lens and language. And then I feel there are in fact critiques from us, yes, but they are insufficient, because in the end it is still Western-centric paradigm. When I try to think about post-colonial theories, for instance. And then the idea that still, by failing to address the sufficiency and legitimacy of local knowledge, primarily asserting theoretical construct and Western knowledge paradigm, these critiques inevitably created an echo chamber that further strengthened the status quo that Western knowledge and cornered the local narratives. Prof. Murad at least tried to address some of these books, which I will come to the critique later, to which part I see that he succeeded, and to which part I think is not. And then another is arguably, to me, the most important point in this book is that it contains the absence of questioning how an abstract about the Malay world was formed within the media studies. In political science, we take for granted politics of identity, for instance. Then the Malay in Sarawak, we take for granted the Malay Melanau belong to one community. That is how we do campaigns and elections and media, political studies, and you come out with all these horse race, the census. But the abstraction of the Malays with respect to journalism is new. And then the lack of critical analysis about how the Malays view themselves and others isolates the more general cosmology that does not account finer voices and reflection beyond accepted media studies, quote unquote. Thus, AHMAD Murad introduced some possible ways to engage in reflecting this ignored dimension, appealing to certain long-standing activities. Okay, and terms such as dia pakai pekerjaan, kalam, And then when I first met this term, is like, it reflects to me Surah Al-Qalam, Noon. And then also Allama bil Qalam, part of the Surah Al-Alaq, the earliest verses. And then, in fact, to my surprise, pekerjaan kalam is also a long-standing Malay term. I never knew this before. And then pantun, kabar, and budi. Budi is also interesting because for me, the way I read him, Murad, is that he tries to place budi within the discourse of the sacred. Budi is also, it comes from a Buddhist term, right? So it's also, hence he tries to incorporate this into the open worldviews, not only of the Malay world, but also from it. So such views could engage in essential philosophy surrounding the media. So this book can also be viewed as a long process of thought evolution. I think you have listened from him just now. Though not complete and strictly chronological. AHMAD Murad is a scholar of intellectual history and media study himself. He is a prolific author who engaged in many fields. However, in most of his other titles, he engages in specific topics. For instance, his most recently published the Avatar of 1786, decolonizing Penang story, okay, specifically discusses about Penang, but not much elaborating on the conceptual and thought processes of the author himself. So I was at least left guessing about his conceptual standpoint and presumption based on grounded analysis he made in other book. So this book, I think, relieves us from that. So it quite clearly spells to a good degree the philosophical worldview of Ahmad Murad, which is, to me, traditionalist and non-Western centric. I don't have a more specific term, but at least from that book viewpoint. Okay, which set to question the crisis of modern knowledge based on Sophia pyramids, the perennial wisdom, the relevance of religion, Islam in this particular case, and propagate such wisdom to be inculcated in media studies. Thus, we are led to a very different approach to understanding the media as body of knowledge. Ahmad Murad problematizes several well-known definitions, such as communication and identity, and then reconceptualize them to expose the limits of institutionalized definitions of those terms. And then in chapter 2, Prophets, Philosophers, and Scholars, he interposed this as personality of imperialism on the one hand, and image and misrepresentation in another, to underscore and examine colonial narrative that influence the mindset of visibly deformed and biased identities of colonized subjects, which obscure meaningful exposition of communicative identities based on notions of bangsa, perjuangan, semangat, raja, and kerajaan, in favor of uncritical acceptance of feudal and budaya popular. So, when I look at the pattern of writing of Ahmad Murad in this book, the rest of the chapters follow a similar rhythm. He exposes what's then, and then he tries to propose or interpose the ideas, okay, and then especially by using Malay terms, okay, and then there are conceptual re-expositions of the media and journalism grounded by specific Malay experience and exposures. This is another important contribution of the book, I think. Specific Malay experience and exposures. They are not exactly fluid in the sense that one would engage a thematic or broad-based book. This is not, I must admit, this is not the easiest read that I have because of the nature of the book. Especially on contemporary books, they run this way. And they are not exactly, perhaps it is more fruitful to think of them as a collection of reflective and critical thought done over the years, providing a quaint sapiential perspective in studying a heavily structured and institutionalized modern mainstream media. I find the writings more philosophical than journalistic. These are not easy chapters to digest. The book is not, so to say, an introduction to media studies, as a common undergraduate textbook would have it. It is on the one hand an exposition of the colonial perspective, and on the other a treatise to reappraise media and journalistic studies of and about the Malay world as intellectual corpus and civilization. The concept and definitions, though are mundane terms, are not mechanistically defined to abide by mainstream media dictionary definitions and mediascape. Last but not least, I wish this book is to be edited further, so its flow improve into a more thematic discussions to ease understanding for the unacquainted in the media and journalism studies like me. These ideas are sometimes repetitive and sometimes out of place and disconnected from a particular chapter. This could result in confusion and even reduce the efficacy of arguments raised from each chapter that is supposed to beautifully support one another, with a capital B, beautifully support one another in a logic and coherence that could be more easily followed by a general audience, especially undergraduates. Now, with respect to the canon, this is, I think, my biggest epistemological question to address. You define the West, But when you say the canon, what exactly that canon is? Is it critical theory? Is it the idea that what lies in Western media theory itself? And then how do you derive that epistemological framework that's to problematize the idea of Western canon itself? And when it comes to countering, what exactly is within the academic lingo, the term counter, is it like critiquing, or is it trying to propose a new theory to improve a certain theory, and so on and so forth? So that I think is my biggest question when I read the book. And then last but not least, the gaps. I think how the book fills certain important gaps in the field that I am familiar with to some extent. One is on political epistemology, journalism and political epistemology. MURAD bravely make a claim that journalism should be closer to political science than what is understood as media studies or communication studies in Malaysia. You know what? The thing is, there is also an emerging field called epistemology that address directly the question of fake news, algorithm-based manipulation, deepfakes, and whatnot. So this is at least a direction towards that. Pointing towards journalism is placed within this discourse to one possibly to alleviate, because journalism is not just let's say easy writing or copy editing or something like that.
Not just the 5 W's and the 1 A.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. Okay. But the deep discourse itself. So I see that as a present opportunity to contribute in political epistemology. And then with respect to Islamic thought and the sacred, like for me, yes, I was so surprised. Okay. And then I look forward to how the sacred discourse evolve further within the conceptualization of journalism itself, which Murad transposes with pekerjaan kalam, the pen. Because how I distinguish it, him and myself, my generation is the keyboard generation. So you see, maybe we come up with a new term. Next is maybe like ChatGPT, like using just the voice, right? So and then to return the spirit of Al-Alim, for instance, in the one of the names, the Asmaul Husna. Okay. And then by going back to Nasrite's idea of sacred science, okay, and applying that in media studies at large. And last but not least, with respect to civilizational studies, I think this is important to co-read this book. I think Prof. Osman also wrote about Islam and Confucianism. And then not only and also Peter Frankopan's The New History. Khairuddin Al-Junid too, Islam in Malaysia, and the idea that how journalism shapes and is shaped by civilization, number one. Number two, that we are not only relating to the West. We are now relating with the Eastern civilizations, or even in my place, I would say, the hidden part still, like Borneo, the small tribes, the Lahanan, the Punan, the Kelabit, the Seletar, and orang asli, the Seletar, Jahud, they're all a part and parcel of what we would perceive as civilization. But that needs a radical project first to inform the public, which I think one of the most salient source is journalism. And then I would like to relate with, this is I think my question to Prof later. How would you see macam I would see the canons of media studies. The way I interpret that is certain theories that is so big, macam agenda setting theory, 1970s, McCombs and Donald Shaw. And then for influencers, I think these days another journalist is the influencers who literally command billions of views today. The two-step flow theory. Lazar's and friends, because it derives literally from political science. It's about US election in 1940s, how to capture public opinion, and then they kata it's about people's choice. Okay, and then user gratification theory, cards, blammer, and whatnot. The idea that we use the media for entertainment, for information and education, even personal identity, oh, you read which newspaper, or you read which blog, or something like that. How do you see this as part and parcel of the Western canon, or somehow this flows into us that we also have taken for granted, perhaps? And then how do you see your proposal about other ways of knowing can address this? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Shazani, for an insightful elaboration of Prof. Murad's work, certain drawbacks perhaps, and certain compliments as well. I remember being in Astra Awani with Cik Kamarul Bahrin Harun, and he mentioned that, you hear about a dog biting a man, but it doesn't make the news. But it's only a news if a man bites the dog. So this is very interesting also in the sense that how news is produced is also defined by the journalists themselves. There's an editing process, there's an editor that, saring. And I think this is often overlooked because we assume that news is just news. And then when we talk about, for example, we tanya, apa kabar? What's the news? Apa kabar? And that's part of our culture, to know what the news is, to be able to tapis, to distill what should be taken and what shouldn't be taken into consideration. And with that, perhaps we can open the floor to questions first, and then we can get to your question also. If there's any questions, please feel free and use this opportunity, inshallah.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So when you mention Western canon, that means you're talking about a certain mindset on how they see the others and how they write about others. Okay, while I was a journalist with the New York Times, I didn't study journalism at all. I was a student of mathematics. I only went into journalism because I got lost. I wanted to be a scientist, but something happened to me. I don't know what to do. I just try being a journalist, and I find it fun and I love it. I came during the time of Khadir Jassin, Ahmad Talib, and all that. Right. Okay. So one thing I learned is that in journalism, in papers, you can run from vested interests. Who owns the paper? Who's behind it? Can defend and can define the whole view of reporting. It's like if I go cover a political rally, if it is from the opposing side, if it looks to me, how many people was there? Okay, you've been to stadiums, you can estimate. I think about 10,000. Oh, put at 5,000. Just to lower the number of supporters. If it is from the supporting side, if it's only about 1,000, put about 2,000, 3,000, up the figures. And it is basically defines, who's in power. And then, you go to a function, regardless of what function, they look for who officiate it. They look for the ministers first. They don't really care about the engineers and all that. They want the ministers to give comments. And it's a function of totally different function. Suddenly you ask about the latest political. But whatever it is, if you ask about something, the minister doesn't know, the expert is there, the minister asks the expert, and okay, and then the minister say, and you quote the minister. It's always like that, Yeah. So it's always about who's some interest. I mean, how do you get by this? Because there is no real neutrality. People claim neutrality, objectivity, but really it's about who is the media masters. Okay.
I think first of all, one needs to view journalism not only as news, but also as opinion. There are two major components to what we call journalism as a profession and as an institution. News is one huge genre, opinion is another genre. And when we talk about opinion, we're talking about argumentation. We're talking about taking sides. We're talking about having a conclusion or otherwise. We're talking about expression. We're talking about assertion of ideas. But when you talk about news, it has to be factual. And the reporter cannot be in the news. The reporter cannot. That's why if we see where the news is concerned, the reporter must cite an authority or a person. Okay? Now, having said that, one needs to go into the anatomy of news journalism. One of which is that why must a reporter? This is not by any law, but these are by conventions. Why is there 5W1H? Also by convention, not peculiarly journalistic convention. 5W1H is asked by scientists. It is within the scientific domain. When you go to a lab and do experiment, you have to have this 5 Ws and 1 H. When the hardest question is why. Okay? Easiest is what. So the Ws are all empirical. Okay? Empirical, factual, objective. You have to segregate yourself from your object of study, separation of facts from values. This is the Western canon. I mean, the various lectures that we had by Prof. SUBHAN, we're talking about revolution and reason. I mean, the Western canon, one of which is the institution of facts, and facts cannot intersect with value, but facts are also values. Facts are also invented. And when you talk about journalism here, we are talking about when we talk about news, it's looking at the factuality of things empirical. Anything that does not fall into the news net is not news. I think that's this Barbara Tuchman. Gay Tuchman, I think Barbara. Oh yeah, Barbara Tuchman. Yeah. Gay Tuchman is the one who wrote about the guns of August, World War I. So this Barbara Tuchman, she talked about the news net. So what happened in Mars or what happened outside this hall that we don't know is not news. News is what is known and what is covered. And for a reporter, the reporter must cite. Yeah? Why? Because it is to protect against criticism. It's not you who are saying it, but the person saying it, you are citing it. So that involves what? That involves accuracy and factuality and truth. So what is accurate need not be true. So again, here we see the overlapping intersection discourses of accuracy, truthfulness, correctness, factuality. What is correct? You quoted him correctly, but what he said may be false. So again, this is the philosophical dimension. These are the things that when you talk about, and that's where the reportage of news, reportage. But where the Western canon is concerned, we have several fundamental elements. One is reason, the other is rationality. And the other, I would say, is objectivity. Objectivity, where you have to be neutral, you cannot take sides. And this is the pride of Western scholarship. Okay? The pride of Western scholarship is being rational and being, we talk about Cartesian, the Cartesian mind. Okay? And this pride of Western scholarship is now collapsing. because it has been stretched to be applied to the genocide that we see every day or we don't see every day. So in other words, they're using and or rather they're abusing their canon to justify the killing of people. So if you remember last year, I made some comments about burning Western books, burning the canons of Western scholarship. It's because of that. They have gone against when BBC, CNN doesn't see it as genocide, when they don't reason it, they cannot reason it, and they justify it as a human being being killed. That's it. Yeah? And when they discriminate between bodies, an Israeli kill has more value than a Palestinian kill. So even in death, there is imperialism. So again, here we are looking at the. I mean, I'm flipping the argument that Western scholarship and culture is going against their canon. So what we see now is a collapse of Western civilization. And the crack is there already. In other words, they do not have any moral right to talk about rights and democracy. So this book is, in a way, is a reflection. But I have to tell you, I mean, this is not the magnum opus. This is not my magnum opus. Okay? I don't treat it as my best book. My magnum opus may be before or after. Okay? How this book came about is during COVID. See, after 2019, we cannot come. I cannot come here. I cannot come to office. I mean, we cannot teach also for 2 years almost. So what happened was that well, not say nothing to do. Of course, there are many things to do. I created 4 manuscripts during the COVID period. Okay? One of which is this one. Of course, I need to revise many things, putting together things, but the 4 manuscripts came together in 2020, and they were sent to the publishers. In all 4 manuscripts were sent to the publishers in 2020. 1 was published in 2022, 3 published in 2023, including this one. But this was sent the earliest. It took 3 years because of the problems with the publisher and so on. Yeah, you're right. I mean, we talk about this. That's the Western canon, and this book tries to resonate that criticism on what I call the Western canon. I mean, we talk about the principles of reasoning and rationality. One example: facts as a category in philosophy. Facts. Before the 17th century, there was no such thing as facts or kenyataan. Nyata ada, tapi tidak ada kenyataan yang boleh. No such thing. I mean, we're talking among the philosophers, the natural philosophers. They don't say things as facts. I mean, the category of facts does not exist. Came the 1700, you have the scientific revolution, and then you have this so-called proof evidence, and then the knowledge was rendered in different ways. Then things that are unseen or cannot be seen and cannot be empirically verified, God, angels, and prophecy, are defactualized. Okay? That's what happened to modern social science. Modern social science have no place for God, prophecy, and the angels. Therefore, when we talk about society in the present academia, in present scholarship, we have to marginalize and put aside the non-empirical entity. We only consider what can be seen and what can be measured. Therefore, the study of man and the study of our society would not be complete if we do not take theology, destiny of men into account. Whereas the destiny of men from the European Enlightenment does not consider a higher authority. there was a violent anti-clericalism in Western Europe. Okay? Destiny of man would be determined by the state, the social contract, Rousseau. Okay? The destiny of man would be determined by the structures of public opinion, social contract. Mana ada public opinion in non-Western society? So public opinion is a category that is imposed upon the study of social science in the Western world. So in other words, when you talk about the contestation in this, when social science is a corpus that was created to address a very local European problem in the 17th century. It was called social physics. It was the problem between the French and their padre. It was a problem between the French and their king. That's it. But that has evolved into what we call sociology, anthropology, and the production of knowledge from that corpus is universalized until now. So again, what an example I mentioned partly in book on Pantun. Now we talk about news as an empirical reality, right? We can measure. But in our folklores, for example, I was talking to yesterday. I was talking about Pantun. No? Pantun is 4 verse or whatever verse, and Syair. These are in a way news, because these talk about current realities. Actually, we see them from the contemporary perspective, and we're not doing justice to the rhyme and rhythm of the Malay Pantun or the Syair, because we thought that that's things happening in the past. No, that's news. That's naturalized logical news to the person. That does not defactualize God and the angels. Whereas the modern news, which emerged in 17th century as a result of the 100-year war, 30-year war in Western Europe, was a protest against the church. So you see this incompatibility that has been universalized from a local problem, and what we've taken that lock, stock, and barrel. So when I talk about social science, and this part of it, we have denied the sacred. There's no place to talk about God when I talk about social science. I mean the 5 classical social sciences: political science, economics, psychology, sociology, and anthropology. These are the 5 social sciences. Yang ada semua, yang lain mengaut. Yang other social science, I mean, people, accountancy, in law, see that, yeah, they are part of the social sciences because they are out of the physical and biological sciences. But being faithful to the Chicago school, in the 1800s, these are the classical disciplines in the social sciences. And if we use these disciplines to know ourselves, we won't know, because they are based on the Cartesian paradigm of knowing, and they are based on public opinion. So in a specific way, if I want to know myself as a Malay, sociologically and culturally, I cannot use the Cartesian paradigm, because it takes me away from my being. I have to use the idea of the intersection between intelligence and emotion, not only the rational mind, but also the irrational mind. In the West, it's again the idea of dualism.
Rational, irrational.
Yeah, this dualism emerges when it started in Rome, 2nd century AD, when Christianity was transferred from Jerusalem to Rome, 2nd century AD, and European culture now partakes that idea of dualism, yes and no, and so on. So therefore, rationality and irrationality. But in the Malay network of thought, there is a 3rd dimension, irrationality. So this irrationality must be understood if you want to understand the non-European mind. I think not only Malay, but other cultures outside of Europe that does not subscribe to that dualistic secular Greco mind that they have inherited.
So Manichaean mindset as well, to see it in binaries,
Manichaean, yeah.
black and white.
And the Persian will say that it originates from them.
Mashallah. No, it's absolutely right, Prof. And you mentioned that this book isn't your magnum opus, but I would say it's a very important text because it highlights again the elements within journalism that we might take for granted. And you know, I'm reminded of this conversation between Carlson Tucker and Nayib Bukele, the new president of El Salvador. So one of the questions that was posed was, how do you see the economic progress of El Salvador? What are your measures to increase prosperity and so on? And Nayib Bukele mentioned, I'm going to seek God's wisdom. And Carlson Tucker was surprised. Like, you are a president in a secular sense. Like, why are you talking about God's wisdom? And this was refreshing because it opens up our understanding that God is there, of course. And it's refreshing because it's a new president. And also, similarly, talking about the things that we cannot see, I think we often, again, overlook the role of shaitan, of Satan in politics, because we always talk about human beings as being opposed to each other, but we have one common enemy, which is shaitan. In all these think tanks and these institutions, what have you, we don't talk about this common enemy of man, which is Satan, because for the fear of being irrational, perhaps. So I think what you've mentioned ties in with this, and and hopefully we can perhaps come up with something new with regards to media and journalism, inshallah. And the Malays would say, masa mencemburui kita. Time is jealous of us, and unfortunately we are, I wouldn't say run out of time, but yes, we are done for today, and we would like to thank you for your presence here, and inshallah we will meet you again in the next session for books and ideas. Thank you so much, Professor Murad. Thank you, Brother Shazani. We
will have a book from our authors here. We'll announce it.
Do you have it?
No, I think I'll be convenient, but not my book, somebody else's book.